All right, lesson 5. Related conditional statements. Converse, inverse, and contrapositive. So there are 4 forms. This hopefully you'll remember this from geometry or sounds somewhat familiar. So we have our original form, also known as what's given. Then we have the converse. Then we have the inverse. And then we have the contrapositive. Hopefully those terms sound somewhat familiar. So, given the original statement, if I go to Summit, then I am in high school. Okay? So the converse is, we just switch it. Okay? So this is if P, then Q. Okay? If P, then Q. The converse is if Q, then P. So if I'm in high school, then I go to Summit. All right. The inverse goes back to the original one. So these two are kind of tied together. The order is still the same. Okay. PQ, but it's not P, then not Q. So basically we are negating both statements. So it's if I don't go to Summit, then I don't go to high school. I'm not in high school. Sorry. Okay. So we just take the original statement. If I go to Summit, then I'm in high school, and negate them both. If I don't go to Summit, I'm not in high school. And the contrapositive is related to this one. So it's switching and negating. So this is not Q, then not P. So this is if I'm not in high school. So there's a negation. Then I don't, there's a negation, go to Summit. Okay? And we can also test the truth and falsehood of these. So if I go to Summit, I'm in high school. Well, that's a true statement. Now, if I said if I'm in Summit, I go to high school, not necessarily. I am in Summit, but I don't go to high school. So, but basically, this is talking about a student. If I go to Summit for my education, then I'm in high school. That's a true statement. You are a high school student if you're going here. If I'm in high school, then I go to Summit. Maybe, but not necessarily. So that's a false statement. Just because you're in high school does not mean you go to Summit. There's plenty of other high schools. If I don't go to Summit, now this can get confusing, so just pick somewhere else. If I don't go to Summit, let's say I go to Eureka, then I am not in high school. Well, that's not true. If I go to Eureka, I'm in high school. If I go to Fox, I'm in high school. So this is also a false statement. If I'm not in high school, okay, so I go to college, then I don't go to Summit. If I'm not in high school, I go to a middle school. I don't go to Summit. That's a true statement. So the last two can get kind of confusing. So what I like to do is pick something that satisfies the antecedent and then apply it. So I don't go to Summit, pick another high school. If I'm not in high school, pick another level of schooling. Seems to make it a little bit easier, at least for me. Okay, so we already talked about this, but I'm going to put it again. So this is P, then Q. The converse is Q, then P. The inverse is not P, then not Q. And the contrapositive is everything, switching and negating, not Q, then not P. Okay, right? The converse, inverse, and contrapositive. So if I take my medication, that's my P, then I will feel better. That's my Q. So the converse, remember, is you just switch them. So if I feel better, then, now sometimes you have to change tense. I took my medication. Okay. The inverse, remember, is back to the original, just switching them. I'm sorry, negating the first one. So if I don't feel better, so negating it, then I did not, again negating it, take my meds. The contrapositive, remember, is switching them and negating. So if I don't feel better, then I didn't take my meds. Okay? So sometimes these related statements can mean the same thing, but it's not always the case. Now let's look at the true statements. So if I take my meds, I will feel better. Let's assume we're just going that this is a true statement because it's saying, I know that when I take my meds, I feel better. So true. If I feel better, then I took my meds. Well, that's saying that that's the only way you could feel better. And that's not necessarily the case. You could feel better even though you forgot to take your meds that day. Okay? If I don't feel better, okay, so if I am worse, then I didn't take my meds. Not necessarily. You could take your meds and they just not work one day. Okay? If I don't feel better, well, hopefully some of you caught my mistake because on the inverse, I did the contrapositive. And, you know, again, I'm human. These things happen. We make mistakes. So it's very easy to get confused, which is why sometimes it is better to, you know, do P then Q to label. And this is Q then P. And that way it's easy to just verify. Did I switch them? Did I do the feel better first? Yes, I did. So this one is not P, then not Q. And if I would have done that and double checked and realized I wrote the not Q first, then I would catch myself. So just ways to help prevent mistakes. So if I don't take my meds, then I won't feel better. So here's my two negations. So let's say I don't take the meds that day. I forget them. I won't feel better. Not necessarily. That's not a guarantee. Again, kind of like the previous one, you could feel better and not have taken your meds. So they're not tied. It's not a guarantee. And we already said this was false. Okay. So moving on. Example 3. The original statement, if an angle measures 90, then it's a right angle. Okay. So 90-degree angle is right. That's true. Converse, I flip them. If an angle's right, then it's 90. Well, it has to be. That's the definition of it. Inverse, negate them both. So if an angle's not 90, again, let's pick something, 80, then it's not right. That's true. Let's say it was 100. That's not right. That's true. Contrapose them, switch them and negate them. If an angle is not a right angle, then it's not 90. In this case, again, true. Because in that case, it's a definition. So it's really hard to come up with a false statement because they define each other. All right, working backwards. If you live in Mississippi, west of the Mississippi, then you live in Missouri. Okay, so remember, the converse is Q then P. So the original, we have to switch them. P then Q. So we say, if you live in Missouri, then you are west of the Mississippi. Okay? So if you live in Missouri, you live west of the Mississippi. That's our statement. That's a true statement. But if you're west of the Mississippi, then you live in Missouri? Nope, there's other states. Okay? Inverse. Okay, remember, the inverse is a negation of the original, which I just screwed up. So if you don't live in Missouri, there's a negation. Then you are not west of the Mississippi. Okay, so if you don't live in Missouri, let's say you live in Washington, D.C., you are not west of the Mississippi. Or you could go to the other side and go like Nevada. So you can find a state that proves that false. Then the contrapositive. Remember, the contrapositive takes the converse and negates them both. So if you don't live west of the Mississippi, then you don't live in Missouri. And that is true. So the contrapositive is always equivalent to the original statement. This means that the original is true, then the contrapositive will also be true. Similarly, if the original is false, so is the contrapositive. The converse and inverse are always equivalent. If the converse is true, then so is the inverse. If the converse is false, so is the inverse. So, one last example. Write the original, converse, and inverse for these statements. Finite math teachers are not normal. So, if I teach finite, we're just going to add if and then and make it sound like a real sentence. If I teach finite, then I am not normal. Now remember, in this case, we actually have a not in my original statement. Okay, there's a not in the original statement. All right, the converse. Remember, we're just switching them. So if I'm not normal, and remember, we're keeping the not because that was part of my original statement, then I teach finite. The inverse negates the original. If I don't teach finite, here's the tricky part, then I'm negating a not. I am normal. That is actually the negation because the first one had a consequent that was a negative. The contrapositive, remember, takes the converse and negates them both. If I'm not normal, oh no, sorry, I'm negating, remember? So if I'm not normal is being negated. So if I am normal, okay, so I just negated this, then I'm negating this, I don't teach finite. Okay? And again, this is one of those ones where you could kind of, based on whether you think the first statement is true or false, get different answers. Okay? But let's say we go through and assume the first one is true. If I teach finite, then I'm not normal, which in my case is true. So if I'm not normal, then I teach finite. No, you can be not normal and teach plenty of other classes. If I do not teach finite, let's say I teach English, then I am normal. Nope, you could teach other classes and be not normal. And then last, if I am normal, then I don't teach finite. Well, based on our original concept, that is true. All right, lastly, we're just going to practice these. So, not R, then S. Remember, then this is a negative statement, just like we had not normal in our original. So the converse is just switching them. So that's S, then not R. The inverse is negating the original in the same order. So the opposite of R, not R, is R, then not S. And the contrapositive, remember, negates both of those. So S becomes not S, then R, because negating not R is just R. And that's it.